dear midlife mama with a book in your heart or a book sitting somewhere in your notebook or note app, this is for you. One day, someone you love is going to wish they had your words. Give them your book now. Writing your book now is what your grandchildren will thank you for in the future. Let me tell you why this is so important. My grandfather was a chef, not a chef with a restaurant, not a chef with a name people outside our family would know, all the family he worked for. But when we visited him growing up, eating his food was a treat, a real treat. The kind of meal you remember with your whole body even decades later. I was young. I didn't ask questions. I didn't take notes. I didn't have to at the time. I just ate. I savored every single bite, never once worrying whether to write down what he was making or how he was making it. Because, well, as a child, you think he will be there forever. But today, I know better, and sadly, I don't even remember what half of those dishes were called. I was 17 when he passed, old enough to write down a few things, but at the time, it didn't matter to me. My grandfather could have written something himself, but he didn't know too, and he didn't as well. That was the era. And that story, the story of everything I lost when I didn't write it down, is the reason I do the work I do now, is the reason this channel exists. So today, I want to slow down and really sit into this story with you, because I think it holds something important for every midlife woman watching this right now. And if you have already figured it out, that is writing your own story and leaving it as a legacy for your grandchildren, well done. That is not nothing. But having the idea alone isn't the same as knowing what to do with it. So if you are at that stage, maybe I have something, now what? Comment, publish below. Because when you do, I will send you the next step, so you know exactly what to do to take your idea from where it is right now to an actual published book that will move you forward. So let's go back to my grandfather. He lived in Nigeria in an era where recipes simply weren't written down. Cooking wasn't something you documented on a card or cooking wasn't something you documented on a card or in a notebook. It was something you carried. It lived in his hands. It lived in his hands, in his memory, in years and years of practice that nobody ever put into words. He learned to cook the way most people of his generation did, by watching, by doing, by making mistakes and adjusting until a dish tasted right. He probably could have told you exactly why he added a certain spice or where a particular dish came from or which relative taught him to make it. He probably had a story behind every single meal he made. But because he never wrote any of it down, not one recipe, not one paragraph, not one note about why a dish mattered to him. And now he's gone. Almost 40 years now. And every recipe he never wrote down went with him into the ground, gone forever. And me, I will give almost anything for one page in his writing, one recipe, one paragraph, explaining why he made a certain dish for special occasions. One story about who taught him or what was he thinking about while he cooked. But that page doesn't exist. That page will never exist. All I have left is the memory of savoring food I can't even name anymore. A feeling without the facts to go with it. Here is what that experience has taught me, and it's something I don't think we talk about enough. We tend to think legacy means something big. Money, property, a name people recognize on a building. But more often, legacy is something much smaller, much quieter, and much more personal than that. Sometimes a legacy is a recipe. Sometimes it's the story of how someone met their spouse. Sometimes it's how someone survived something hard, a war, a move to a new country, a marriage that fell apart, a child they lost. Sometimes legacy is simply knowing who someone really was in their own words, not through the fuzzy, half-remembered version their grandchildren tell each other years later. And here's the painful truth. Most of that disappears. Not because people didn't live rich, meaningful, complicated lives. They did. It disappears. It disappears because nobody ever wrote it down. Why? There was time to do so. This is exactly what happens in so many families. A grandmother's story about her childhood, a father's hard-won business wisdom, a mother's account of raising 6 kids virtually alone. All of it lives only in memory, and memory doesn't last. Memory fades. It gets confused. It gets passed down secondhand until it barely matters or until it barely resembles the real thing. And then eventually it disappears with the person who held it. I think about my grandfather constantly when I think about this, not just what he cooked, but who he was underneath, what he was proud of, what he struggled with, what he wanted for his children and grandchildren. I'll never fully know because he never wrote it down, and I never asked why I had the chance. And many of you may have similar experiences, wishing we know more than we do right now. But all of that is lost. So if you're a midlife woman watching this right now, I want you to really hear what I'm about to say. You already have what my grandfather had. You have a story. You have a memory, a way of doing something, or surviving something, or loving someone that only you carry. Maybe it's your own version of his recipes, a way of cooking, a family tradition, a skill you picked up along the way. Maybe it's something much bigger, the story of your childhood, the story of a marriage, the story of raising your children or not being able to, the story of an illness you survived, or a career you built from nothing, or a faith journey that carried you through something unbearable. Right now, all of that lives in your head. It comes out in conversations at family dinners. It comes out when your kids ask questions at just the right moment. It comes out in fragments, in stories you tell out loud but have never once written down. And one day, someone you love, a daughter, a son, a grandchild, a niece you barely think about right now, is going to wish they had all of it in your own words. They are going to sit somewhere quiet, missing you, wishing they had asked more questions while they still could, wishing they had one page in your handwriting, one recipe memory written the way only you could write. This is the part that matters most right now. You have the chance my grandfather never had. You have the chance to write it down while you still can. He didn't get that chance, or maybe he did and nobody encouraged him to take it. But you have it right now, today, while you are watching this video. So what does it look like for you? This is exactly why I help midlife women write and publish books, whether that is a book, a memo, or the story of your life. I want to be really clear about something. This is not about becoming a best-selling author. It's not about being a real writer, whatever that even means. Most of the women I work with have never written a book before in their life. I never wrote one before I wrote one. And I never even thought I was a sort of person that could write a book. Many midlife women think of themselves as mothers, grandmothers, nurses, teachers, business women, women who have lived life to the full and simply never had a reason or the confidence to put any of it on paper. So what this is actually is about taking what is in your head and your heart and turning it into something real, something your family can hold, something that outlasts you. A book doesn't have to be 300 pages. It doesn't have to take 5 years to create. It doesn't have to sit unfinished in a drawer the way so many of our stories do. With the right process and the right support, you can turn your story or your recipes or your children's book idea into a finished published book far faster than you think possible. So when I think about what it would have meant if my grandfather had done this, even a small book, 20 recipes, a paragraph next to each other in his own words about why it mattered, that book would be one of the most treasured things in our family. It would have outlived all of us. That is the kind of legacy I want to help you leave. Not a perfect literary masterpiece, just your story in your words, finished and real. I don't want your story to disappear the way my grandfather's recipes did. If you have a story inside you right now, a memo, a children's book, a life you want to put into words before it's too late, I would love to help you get it done. Everything I teach on this channel and everything inside my program is built for exactly this moment, for exactly this kind of woman, a woman who has lived enough life to have something worth writing, and who just needs the right process to finally get it out of her head and onto the page. You may be wondering at this point, is my story good enough to be published? Well, many women ask that same question. I have been talking to a lot of midlife women lately, and their stories have stopped me in my tracks. Women who struggled with anxiety for years and never told anyone. Women who fought illnesses quietly, alone, while still showing up for everyone else. Women carrying grief they never fully put into words. Women learning self-compassion for the first time in their 50s after decades of being hard on themselves. Every single one of them has felt that same nudge. A quiet voice saying, write this down, write this down. So here is what I keep noticing. These women don't think their story is a book. They think it's just their life. Just something they went through. Just something they survived. So they push the nudge away. They tell themselves someone else has already written this. They tell themselves their story isn't dramatic enough or unique enough or important enough to matter to anyone else. But that voice keeps coming back because deep down, they know there is a woman out there right now in the middle of her own anxiety, her own illness, her own grief, who needs to hear that someone else made it through. Here is what I want you to understand why this story matters. You don't need a dramatic story to write a powerful book. You need an honest perspective. The woman who is anxious right now doesn't need a perfect story. She needs your story. The real one. The one where you didn't have it all figured out. The one where you were scared and tired and still kept going. That is not too ordinary to write. That is not too ordinary to publish. That is exactly what real people are looking for. So if you're sitting there right now with a story like this, anxiety, illness, grief, a hard season you came through, I already know the question in your head. Is my story good enough to publish? That question is the only thing standing between you and the book that has been waiting inside you for years. And I want to answer that question for you personally. If that is you, comment with the word clarity. When you do, I'll personally help you figure out whether your story is ready and what it will take to turn it into a published book. Not someday, not when you feel brave enough, but now. Why the nudge is still speaking to you. Comment clarity and let's find out together if this is the book you were meant to write. I'll see you in the comments.